Good evening. My name is Noemi Herzig. I am the Director of Jewish Cultural Arts and Education at the JCC in Ann Arbor. I'm very excited to welcome you all to this Zoom program, Conversations with our host, Chuck Newman. Just a few housekeeping items. We are recording this session. If you choose not to be seen, please go to the little video camera symbol on the bottom left of your screen and turn the camera off by clicking on it. All attendees are muted. Please use the chat feature to send in your questions. The views expressed by Chuck Newman and his guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Ann Arbor JCC. All previous conversation recordings can be found on the JCC webpage at jccannarbor.org. And now it is my pleasure to call our host, Charles Newman.
Thank you, Noemi. And thanks all of you for attending this evening. I want to thank the Jewish Community Center for being our host. And I want to thank the people who have made this possible. If you collected signatures for voters, not politicians, if you signed a petition, if you commented, why don't you just put your name in the chat so we can recognize you for your contribution, because that's how we got to this point where we are this evening. I also want to thank all of you who sent in questions. 8 pages of questions. It's going to be a fun night. And I'd like to, of course, thank our guests, starting with Yalcin Yonikoglu. He's the brilliant systems developer who is responsible for not only Next Vote, but also for Wave and Ballot Power, and all of which were the best programs in their class. And every time I have Yalcin on, I also have to mention he is the host of the Dromedary Express, Sunday mornings at 11, WCBN. It's a great show, world music. Yalcin's partner and also a founder for those groups is Bob Chunn. Bob's the fellow who's responsible for taking Yalcin's creations and seeing that they get used out in the real world. And Bob is the former vice president for digital for Borders, Inc., where he had P&L responsibility for Borders.com website with $170 million a year in revenue, and Borders ebook business with $100 million in revenue. Sergio Martínez-Beltrán covers the state capitol for Bridge Magazine, the award-winning investigative publication. Every year they win that award, and he covered politics before he moved to Lansing in Nashville for Nashville Public Radio, where he won a regional Edward R. Murrow Award. His reporting has also appeared on NPR, the BBC, Standard Examiner, San Antonio Express News, and JFR Media. And then our final guest is Mark Brewer. He has, for decades, devoted substantial time for pro bono legal work, primarily through the ACLU. He's handled scores of ACLU cases in areas from free speech, religious liberty and separation of church and state, to civil rights, employment, drug testing, and FOIA, OMA. He is particularly proud of his First Amendment work in arguing and winning the first HIV/AIDS discrimination case in the Michigan Supreme Court. So you can see that we are indeed privileged to have our panel of guests this evening. Bob, what criteria was the commission charged with to take into account when they created these maps?
So thanks for having me on, Chuck, and I'm happy to be here and be talking about such an important topic as redistricting. So I'll jump right in. There are not only 7 criteria, but there are 7 criteria that are ranked, and so ranked in importance for the commission, the MICRC, to follow. So the first one is equal population, which is actually also in our U.S. Constitution, and that means that every district is relatively the same size, and there are actually thresholds for that. The next is pretty obvious, but a district can't be broken up into pieces, so it has to be geographically contiguous. Now we're getting into some of the criteria that are really debated most in redistricting. So the maps have to, and districts have to reflect the state's diverse population and communities of interest, which is a topic in and of itself. They can't provide a disproportionate advantage to either political party, and we call this partisan fairness. They can't favor or disfavor any incumbent elected official or candidate. So you can't make maps to benefit your favorite politician. They should do a decent job of making sure that the cities and county lines are held to. And 7 is they should be reasonably compact. I want to address a question that was asked just in chat, which is about the VRA. And so the VRA is part of several different pieces of criteria here, and it is part of our U.S. Constitution. So it's reflected in criteria number 4 primarily, which is that number 3, which is that they have to reflect, the maps and districts have to reflect the diverse population of their state. So that's where it's captured.
I'm going to ask the other panelists as well. How do you think they did on meeting those criteria, Bob?
Oh, well, I think they did a pretty good job. I think, you know, if I want to say I'm super happy that we have a independent citizens redistricting commission. And I think they did a very good job in certain components. I think where they really struggled was in balancing the issues of partisan fairness, the Voting Rights Act, and they in communities of interest especially. So you know, many times we would have rather that they focus specifically on those issues in the beginning rather than, you know, at the end of the process. But we definitely have maps now that are better than we had before. And we have maps that provide a chance for the majority of voters to have the majority of seats most of the time. There are some questions about that in the State House, but there's lots we could talk about. I'm sure everyone else has opinions, so I'll let them go.
And I'm going to ask my our other panelists here if they have an overarching opinion. How do you think the commission did?
Chuck, I'm overall disappointed in the commission from several perspectives. You know, I think process-wise, the way they went about drawing the maps was poor. They started drawing maps in August without considering partisan fairness. They didn't even have the Voting Rights Act analysis done. And so they really spent several weeks drafting maps that ends up they had to significantly redraw because their process was so flawed. And I think in the end, they fell short on a number of the criteria. The maps are not as fair from a partisan perspective as they should be. Their own lawyer told them that they were supposed to reduce partisan fairness to 0, and they did not. The maps are not as compact or as they could be as well. So I think they fell short on both process and substance in the end, and frankly, they have themselves to blame for that.
Well, you know, when a litigator talks like that, when I'm left with an impression that we have another topic to talk about at some length, but we'll do that later in our show. Sergio, do you have an opinion as to how they did?
Sure. I mean, this is Sergio. For those watching, again, thank you so much for having me today. I've been covering a lot of the redistricting process in the state, and you know, we've been able to really spend hours and hours and hours. And when I say hours and hours, I mean it. The meetings were 8-9 hours long. And I spent that much time with the commission as well as other colleagues from different outlets across the state, right? And so I say this because I think that what Mark is saying is really important. And I think that maybe one of the reasons why the commission did the work they did, the way they did it, is because these are everyday people, just like everyone in this call. They've never drawn lines before. They were not politicians. So suddenly you have 13 people from all over the state who are starting to learn how to use computers, how to use mapping systems and mapping softwares, how to analyze this avalanche of data that they're getting from a voting rights expert and a partisan fairness analysis. And, you know, I bet it has to be overwhelming. And so there is a lot, the learning curve for this commission was huge. And truly, it will be in a way the same way for the next commission in a decade, because it is made up of everyday people who have never drawn a single line in their lives up until this point. Now, I do think that something that Bob mentioned is that, you know, the commission truly had to handle all these criteria. And I think at the beginning, when they went out in this statewide tour to hear from the public, they were very excited to hear all the feedback about what a community of interest is and where do you think my community should be placed or what my community looks like. And so they gathered all that information, which was thousands of comments, and then they have to go to the drawing board and try to draw those communities the way they asked them to be drawn, but at the same time, making sure that there's partisan fairness, that they comply with the Voting Rights Act, that they do all these other things, right? And so I do think that, again, because it is a new process, maybe the commission was a little naive about the way they could placate all the concerns and like, you know, draw maps that made everyone happy, because at the end of the day, it seemed like something had to give. And I think at the end of the day, they were not thinking about how all of these criteria were clashing and were going to clash, and what they were going to have an impact on the final maps.
Bob, how did you think that the community input went? Was there enough of it? Was it more or less balanced between various partisan interests? I know you were working on that.
We were deeply involved in communities of interest and mapped many groups geography for them and submitted it to the commission. And I think, you know, unfortunately, this is probably the biggest falling down, or one of the largest falling down that the commission had during the redistricting period. They got a lot of commentary. They had a stated goal of receiving 10,000 comments, and I believe they got upwards of 30,000 comments. They never came up with a way to process it. And that was really, you know, so many groups, you know, they spent, you know, weeks working across coalitions and, you know, especially in Detroit and Grand Rapids and Lansing, they really did a lot of work to assemble their arguments. They brought people in front of the commission, and really only a few select communities of interest got what they wanted. And it came down to the fact that they never established what a community of interest was. So it could be anything. And unfortunately, some use that for bad purposes and claim communities of interest that weren't ever intended in the law. So I think it's one of the things that you just won't find in the maps, adherence to communities of interest in any meaningful way.
We're going to come back to that topic a little bit later. One of the questions I got was, what was the demeanor of the commission? Do you know? And do you know what the professions were of the people who were chosen? What type of background did these folks have?
It was a real range. You know, you have folks that you have a medical student that is Anthony Eid. You also have attorneys like Steve Led and the chair Rebecca Zatella. You had retirees, you had real estate agents. It was truly a mix of ages and also of professions. I think I do have to mention that the commission was predominantly white, and that was some of the concerns that members of the community had, that it was not fully representative of the demographics of the state. But also they were selected randomly, right? It was not that they were handpicked necessarily. In terms of the demeanor, I think, again, they were very open at the beginning to hear all this feedback, truly, because they were learning a lot. And it was the first stage, right? They started this process without census data that was delayed because of the pandemic. And so they were very eager, very excited. And I think then they crashed against this wall once they received all the data, right? And they started then to have to process all of that. And again, try to figure out how to draw districts. And I think, in the past, the way we drew districts in the state was behind closed doors. It was lawmakers. So they didn't have to deal with public comment. Again, these are 13 individuals who are not politicians. And so suddenly they're receiving all this emotional feedback from people in Southeast Michigan, for example, who are concerned about losing Black representation. They're hearing people from Flint. You're also hearing people from rural communities, very emotional comments. And so suddenly they have to figure out what to do now. And I think that you could see how they started very eager, and then that emotion was dwindling down, and they were starting to get a little upset. It became very emotional. You saw these agreements, which, seeing these agreements was surprising, because it's the first time we see these agreements in the state as people draw lines, but truly it is how we do, the sausage making process. It is the process. Process is ugly. But I do think at the end of the day, what was significant here is that whatever the final maps look like, truly an overwhelming majority of commissioners banded together, voted together, and supported these maps. They worked together. And what was fascinating was that politics was kept out from most of the process, which is significant, and we have to highlight it.
It sounds like the jury system working well, if you will. A number of questions have arisen about the boundaries, and I know that most of our attendees this evening are from Washtenaw County and Oakland County, and if we have time, we'll go beyond that. But Bob or Yalcin, could either of you show us how the districts have changed for those counties?
Sure. Do you want to show, Yalcin, or do you want me to?
No, you go ahead and show it, Bob.
All right, I'm going to bring up my screen.
While you do that, I think I'm interested in telling my take on the process too. I agree with Sergio a whole lot that it was a lot of good people with good intentions. They did work. Being the first of its kind, there were a lot of logistical problems that we suffered a lot, and other people, and openness was an issue. And I'm not just talking about memos. I'm talking about data, formulas, how you calculate certain criteria. Those were not really open. Even the map making tools it turned out to be an in-house tool that we didn't have access to. So a lot of gripes, but even on issues like VRA, I'm pretty happy about it, and I can tell you later.
Okay, so Bob, first of all, I know we're using the system that Yalcin developed with your assistance. Can we take a look at the maps that were adopted, and you can tell us a little bit about
I'm going to take us right there. And so I want to start just to say this is free software for anybody to use. It's nextvote.us, and you can come see the exact same thing I'm showing you right now and look at the maps yourself. We made this over the course of the redistricting period, and what we do, what you're seeing here, I'm going to show you. There are 5 congressional maps that were under consideration. Chestnut is the one that won. And this is how we look at Chestnut. And then I'm going to dive, and I won't go into this level of detail for all of them, but just so you can get a sense of what you'll be seeing. We look at seat count. And the way we look at seat count, this is dealing with partisan fairness. We look at the 2016 election. These are actual results, and the 2020 election. And we essentially restate what happened in 2016 and 2020 inside of the new maps. So we're looking to say if people came out like they did in 2016, where there was a slight Republican majority, it would return 6 seats to 7 seats, this map would. If they came out like they did in 2020, where there was a slight Democratic majority, this map would return a 7-6. So that's pretty fair. We see a small population deviation. We count the number of cities that this map cuts through. And the COI is community of interest. And so there are 40 some communities of interest that we work with and develop maps for, and we look and see if they're cut or not. And then this is the topic that a lot of people are talking about today. This is the VRA, the Voting Rights Act. And there were several different interpretations of the Voting Rights Act. Going into it, most of us were looking at the VRA as requiring that 50+1, 50% Black people, for instance, in a district +1 would allow them a majority to win a race. It was a simple definition, but that one might have been a simplistic definition. And the commission, the MICRC, got different advice that allowed them to create districts that were smaller even than 40%. And so we've counted both ways. So when you look at next vote and you see the 2 VRA districts, that compares to 2 in the current maps and the enacted map, and you can look at either. Yalcin's going to talk about this in just a moment, I think. So we see that a combined census count of Black people and Hispanic people that are more than 40% inside of 2 districts, and no districts have more than 50%. So that's something that a lot of people are still talking about. I'm going to take us quickly over, and you can see this is the Chestnut map and how it affects Ann Arbor. So you can see that Ann Arbor, the surrounding Washtenaw County, almost entirely held whole. There's 776,000 people in this new district that was created, and it includes Ypsilanti as well, and then some of the downriver area, kind of like it does right now. And then in this is the state Senate map. I'm going to make sure we can see it all here.
Bob, can we go back to the congressional just for a moment?
Sure, yes.
Okay, now we all know Debbie Dingell is moving to Ann Arbor. Why is she moving to Ann Arbor, given that this is the new congressional map? Anybody want to speak to that on a panel? Sergio, I'm sure you have an opinion.
Well, I think that potentially, and Bob, feel free to jump in, or anyone else. I think it's a political calculus here. Probably she feels more comfortable with the constituent in that district than in the 13th district, the new 13th district, which is the one where she was going to be placed, and she was going to have to run against Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, who also announced she is retiring. So I think that it probably served her better in terms of politics. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a political process, y'all. They are trying to figure out what's a district that's going to work for them and what's a district that's going to help them win.
Bob, is it easy for you to overlay what the old district that Ann Arbor was in looked like?
Yes. Just like this.
Whoa!
I have a brilliant partner who does this. Who came up with this. So I think we're the only ones who are able to really display this kind of a setup. So we're looking at this green area here is what the currently enacted map looks like. And So anyone can do that. If you come into next vote, over on the right-hand side, you'll see these enacted districts. So you can kind of see how that's District 7, where Tim Wahlberg was, and District 11. And again, this is Debbie Dingle's current district.
If there are any districts that any of you want us to make sure we take a look at, put that in chat. And time permitting, we will do so.
I defer to Sergio and Mark. You know, Yalcin and I, we never talked about candidates during the whole process because it was specifically excluded for the commission to speak about. And so we stayed clear of who was going to get which seats in our analysis, and so we're in the same position as the rest of you.
Hey, can we take a look at Oakland?
Sure.
Just to jump in real quick, just to clarify my comments on Debbie, she did say that most of her constituents fall within the 6th congressional district, which is the new district that Bob showed. And Dearborn is not in that district, and she didn't want to run in a voting right opportunity district. Just wanted to clarify.
So this is the District 11 as it will be, and there's a little bit of a color shading similar thing, but I'll click it on.
I hate to make this up. Could you go back to the new? I hate to make this observation. It kind of looks like an elephant.
It may, but this district looks like it's going to benefit Democrats, Democratic voters versus Republicans.
Okay, and you're going to overlay the existing district.
Yep, right here. So there's always a little bit of a gaming here because the maps are very different than the current enacted maps. So that's District 11 to District 11. This district, the new District 11 also has parts of 9 and parts of 14.
So the dark green is the old one.
The dark green is the currently enacted, soon to be old map.
Yeah. And what's the anticipated partisan split on the new?
The new, so District 11 looks to us like 58% Democratic voters and 39% Republican voters.
Okay.
And you can see also in next vote here, you can see the racial breakdown of any given district, which we get from the 2020 census.
All right, and let's take a look at the Michigan Senate if we can.
This is the Michigan Senate. I'm gonna back up a little bit here and get us down to Ann Arbor. And so in the Senate, the decision was made to split Ann Arbor. And so there's this is the, let me go to this one right here. This is the current enacted map, District 18. And then this is the one that takes the top half of Ann Arbor. And then the district right here, which is District 15, takes the lower half of Ann Arbor. And so this is also a Democratic leaning district, 71% to 25%. Any questions about this from others on the panel? I'd say again, for anybody watching, this is happening quick, but you can do this exact same thing that I'm doing in next vote if you want to. And then this is how, oh, sorry, Chuck.
Go ahead.
I was going to move over to the House map.
Okay.
This is in my view, our view, I guess I'd say, is next vote. We see this as the worst of the 3 maps that were produced. And I want to point out why. It doesn't return. So this is in the 20, this is really important in our work, is that in the 2020 election, where there was the largest turnout in Democratic history in order to win that, and this map would not provide Democratic voters with the majority of the seats. It's the only one that doesn't give the majority of the seats to the majority of the voters of the three, according to the 2020 election. Now, there's other ways that people look at this, you know, using blends of elections and things, but we're actually just we're taking real election results. So you have to do better than 2020 to win the House. With this.
Can I just interject something, Bob? One thing that was mentioned earlier was how they fixed maps iteratively and they were new to map making. But another thing was timing. House maps are the hardest one. Instead of putting it first, they leave it at the end. And that, in our opinion, led to running out of time issues. Sorry, Bob, go ahead.
No, it's a great point. And, you know, they started with what, you know, it may not look like it from the outside, but the easiest map to do is the one with 13 districts. And the next hardest one to do is the one with 38 districts, the Michigan Senate. But when you get down to 110 districts and you have to consider all of the criteria in ranked order, and they were learning on the fly, and I think they learned a lot making these maps, and they were progressing. They really had been progressing until they stopped because they decided to. They could have kept going. We wanted them to keep going. Many of you fought with us to ask them to keep going, but they didn't. So this is how Ann Arbor gets broken up in this map. And you know, I want to point out why that is, because a lot of people are sensitive to the fact that their city was cut up into different pieces, and that they might be thinking about how that affects their representation. But in order to give partisan fairness to everybody, which is across the whole state, so the most votes get the most seats, you had to go into the cities to find the populations and spread out the Democratic voters into the suburbs as well, so that you could make overall a partisan fair map. And so you see a lot of that, and you know, there's some of it has to happen. So here in Ann Arbor, we're cut up into basically 4 different pieces. And I can show you, I think that's 55 currently. So that's just outside of Ann Arbor. And then this is the inside. So it also has some pieces and parts. Sorry, there we go. So it also has some pieces and parts that the current map, the enacted one that we're replacing, as you can see, had been cut into some pieces. So those are the three maps that are up for being enacted in the coming months.
It's hard for me to monitor chat. Were there other districts that people wanted a similar analysis for? Did you notice Noemi or any of the other panelists? If not, I did see something about Rashida Tlaib's district, asking about that. Could we take a look at that and how that changes? And then if any of our panelists have any comments about her political chances given this new district.
Here, so pull up the congressional.
So somebody is asking to please review the map district in the northern part of the state.
Okay, we'll do that next.
Okay.
So
I'd also urge you to go check out nextvote.us. You can do all this browsing yourself too. There's plenty of data there.
So these are the districts around Detroit that have been redrawn. I can show you what they look like because of what they looked like previously. District 14, District 13, of course, Debbie Dingle's District 12. So, and I'm going to take us up north. I actually live up here now, all the way out on This is my home right here on Drummond Island. And this is basically all one district. At the congressional level, almost the entire UP and Northern Michigan is one district. And I'll show you according to the Senate as well here. Sorry about that. So you can see the northern Michigan is split east and west, and the UP is split into two pieces. And we can see these are all going to be majority Republicans.
Can I answer some of the question in the comments? Is that which districts switch from parties in Senate? That's hard to answer because district numbers are all jumbled. And from the get-go, they decided not to build and design maps based on existing enacted, supposedly, we decided that they are gerrymandered. So it's really hard to answer that question.
Which of the congressional districts are going to be most competitive? And any of you on the panel can.
We actually list the competitive districts. So going on next vote.
Could you show us?
Yes. So right here in the U.S. congressional chestnut map, we see District 7 and District 10.
Which are where? What colors are those on the map?
Right here. So this is District 7 in Lansing.
Okay.
And as you can see, it has a very slight Democratic majority, 49% to 48%.
All right.
And
What
then
else?
the other is District 10, which is right here. And this has a slight leaning in the other direction, 49% Republican, 48% Democratic.
Okay. Any others that are?
Yeah, I mean, once you get in the Senate, there are. So this is really one of the reasons why we liked this map better, was because it does flip from 1820 with a Republican majority to 2117 with a Democratic majority. And this has two competitive Democratic districts, meaning that they're barely Democratic. So District 9 right here. And so this is always going to be the case because we're saying competitive is within 1%. That's subject to your opinion. But so it's District 9 and District 11 both have slight Democratic majorities. So this map could turn out to be, depending on turnout, on who comes to vote, this map could really go either way.
And I imagine it also depends on who the candidates are.
Of course.
Yeah.
And then in the House map, there are 3 competitive districts. So this is Hickory. We have District 31 here, which is Milan, and to the east. We have District 46, which is to the west of Washtenaw County into Jackson, has a slight Republican advantage. And District 61, which is north of Detroit, has a slight Republican advantage, 49 to 48.
Well, I have a feeling that both parties are going to use this information to focus their efforts as well. I want to make sure we have enough time to discuss possible lawsuits, litigation. Mark, first of all, you want to talk about, there's been one suit filed already? You can't speak? Mark Brewer not being able to talk is a terrible thing. Noemi, can you unmute him if indeed you have?
Yeah, I was just unmuted. Thanks, Chuck.
Yeah.
So as Sergio noted in the chat, there is one lawsuit pending claiming that all 3 maps violate the Voting Rights Act. I'm not going to comment on the merits of that lawsuit. Except to say the complaint and the brief are really badly drafted. I've read them. The commission's response is due this week, and we'll see what the commission did. I do want to say, though, apropos of my earlier remarks, I think the commission handled race very badly. I think the African-American community in this state was disrespected in this process. I don't know if any of you watched the taped secret meeting that they had, that the Supreme Court forced them to make public. That meeting was all about race. There was nothing in that meeting which was privileged or confidential. In my view, the commission simply didn't want to talk about race in public, which is terrible. And just again, an example of how the African-American community in this state was disrespected in the process. Does that mean the maps are going to get overturned? I don't know. But again, you don't talk about race in this state or in any state in a secret meeting. And I'm glad the Supreme Court called them out on that and that the contents of that meeting were made public. It was a disgrace.
Can I say something about that VRA too? Some of their actions were also, remember, motivated by their legal advice, right? So that's an important thing. As far as VRA goes, I was disappointed with openness of their criteria. This VRA 40, just for me not being a legal expert, is the way we took it was in a district, if the Hispanic and Black population amounted to 40% or more, that was a VRA district. Used to be 50% just the Black population. So we calculated our formulas like that. But I think this opportunity district, this new lingo they introduced means, well, Black population being more than 50% is an overkill. If a Democratic majority is in a district, if they are more than half of that Democratic representation, that's an opportunity. They can win the primary and then become the seat in that district. At first, so now that we have the numbers, we see that that is really what's happening. So
might it be possible to see that on the map? I don't know whether you.
Yeah, Bob, if you can go to, let's start with actually Chestnut. So Chestnut seems like they have this 2 VRA districts with this new 40% assumption. But we found out that if you go to District 12 and 13, which are the new VRA districts, they don't qualify as African-American population being more than 50. But you see that here in district, they are more than 45% and Hispanics are 10%. And so that's the definition, the new definition of VRA. Which
okay, so let's for a second, I want to reinforce your point. So what you say that this district is projected as the Democrats are going to get 66% of the vote. And you're saying that, was it the?
This has to do with the candidate of choice. And one of the issues with the VRA is that having to do with the primaries, and unfortunately they did.
So, the
if I may finish my point. So it's almost certainly going to go Democratic. And what you're saying is the majority of the Democrats are Black.
In this case, the majority of the Democrats are not Black. And
well, you just spoiled the if you can go to District 12, Bob, which is right about Dearborn, and this is just go to the next one up.
Oh, sorry.
So this is another district that fits the VRA 40, because look at the Black population is 44, Hispanic is 3, And so the question is, are the Black population more than half of the Democratic population, which seems to be in the majority? If that is, that's an opportunity. So it's all good and fine, but here we're talking about a piece of data that's not readily available, which is who's a Democrat and who's a Democrat, who's African-American, who's a white Democrat, right? We have that data. So when we look at it, we look at the District 12, surely it's an opportunity district because Blacks, who are 44% of this district, they're also the majority of the Democrats. However, District 12, which Bob was showing earlier, this one,
13.
even though this maps meets the 40% criteria, 45 and 10%, this one is not. It's not going to be Blacks. Even when we look at their voting records for who votes at primaries, they are never going to get to choose their candidate of choice, even though whoever that candidate is elected in the primaries will surely win because it's a Democratic majority district. So,
Okay. Mark, I want to get back to lawsuits. And I'm asking you for opinions, and maybe you're not in a position to opine. You think there are going to be more?
Yes, I think there will be. One of the reasons is, Chuck, that unlike the previous commission, Michigan used to have a commission, and under that language, there was only 60 days to sue. That language was removed by the authors of Proposal 2. So there's actually no time limit on suing. Somebody could sue next year after the election results are in. But I do expect there'll be more lawsuits. The Republicans around the country are questioning whether commissions like this even have the authority to decide congressional redistricting under a provision of the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Supreme Court has disagreed with them, but I think Republicans are looking for an opportunity to revisit that, and they may use the Michigan congressional map as an opportunity to do that. I would just point out a few other things. You know, the law is very clear, for example, that the congressional districts are supposed to be balanced to the person. These maps aren't, and there's no justification for that. So this is just another place where the commission, frankly, didn't do its job in terms of buttoning down everything and making sure all these things were taken care of. Yalcin made a good point about the VRA guidance. In other states like Colorado, the Colorado Commission published publicly in advance what its criteria were going to be, so the public could see them and use them as the process proceeded. This commission never did that. They didn't do it on race. They didn't do it on partisan fairness. They didn't do it on any of the criteria. They were basically ad hocing their way through this process. They had the constitutional guidelines, but you need more specificity than that. The constitutional guideline says, follow equal population as mandated by the federal constitution. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? And again, in Colorado and other states, they fleshed that out so people could see whether they were following it. Same thing would have happened on VRA. Instead of flip-flopping from 35 to 40 to 55, they should have said up front, this is what we're going to do on the VRA, and this is why. So again, I think this thing has just been rife with procedural and process problems. I don't necessarily blame the commissioners. Somebody else pointed out earlier that they were new to this process, but it could have been done much better. Other states have brand new commissions every 10 years, and they did it better than Michigan. So I think a real thorough review of this process needs to happen so that it's much, much better in 10 years.
And the commission plans to do that in the next few weeks. They plan to put out a report on their process and improvements. If I can add one more thing here quickly, I do think that this issue is so important. Let's think about it. We're talking about Black voters in the state. Black residents in the state, that for Democrats, right, when we're talking about the Democratic Party, we know that Black voters have helped them win over and over and over. Now, taking the politics out of it, I do think it is important to hear what Black voters have been saying and are saying about how the process worked for them, right? And we have heard them say that the commission didn't spend enough time discussing Detroit districts. And to be quite frankly, there was a point that the commission spent more time discussing Ann Arbor than Detroit. That is a fact. They spent more time discussing whether to draw the line here in Ann Arbor or move it over here than in Detroit. And it is huge, like it is significant. And going to Yalcin real quick, and something that Mark talked about, and I have to do this plug because I think it's important. When the reason why we know what the commission talked about in that closed door meeting was because the press banded together, including Rich Michigan, my outlet, and we sued the commission and we won because we really thought that people needed to know what was happening in that meeting. And what we learned about was, first, there was nothing revelatory. What we learned from that meeting was a lot of what the attorneys have said in public. But what we did find super interesting was that the commission was more willing to talk about groups that have presented maps that showed an improvement in terms of partisan fairness in private than in public. So they talked about the Michigan AFL-CIO, they named Promote My Vote and their maps. And so that's what we learned too. It was like that they were more willing to talk about race and certain groups more candidly in private than what they did in public.
Mark, what's the chance that, let's assume that some of these lawsuits prevail, then what?
Oh, the Constitution's pretty clear on that, Chuck, that the commission then is ordered by the Michigan Supreme Court to redo the maps. And time is tight, but this is these are 10-year maps. The important thing here is to get it right, not to be rushed. The commission basically, in my view, gave up last December. They quit before they were really done with the maps. And so, that's the problem they now have for themselves, that, the court may order them to redo some of these maps, and they're just going to have to come back together and do it.
And this is the Michigan Supreme Court as the final decision?
Yeah, appeals like the Voting Rights Act lawsuit that's been discussed are in the Michigan Supreme Court.
All right, we have a few more minutes. Why don't there were some specific questions that we can address about specific candidates. Someone want to know if Representatives Haley Stevens and Andy Levin, how that might turn out. Any opinions? Not in the prognosticating game?
Not for us.
Okay, same thing for Fred.
Maybe for 2022 though. Well, maybe later this year.
All right. Well, Noemi, any questions that need to be addressed or should be addressed before I start wrapping things up? You're gonna have to unmute yourself.
I think Yalcin is looking at the chat. Sergio, so I let you field the questions.
You mind reading them so everybody can hear it?
I'll read one by Connie. If they have to do the maps, it will be hard on the Secretary of State and the candidates. The SOS has less time than usual to prepare the clerks for the election, and the candidates must file by April 19th.
Can I make an historical observation here, Chuck?
Sure.
We have had maps adopted in Michigan as late as June, and everything was held on time. Filing deadlines can be moved. Everything will get done. We've never had to move the primary. So while this needs to be done quickly, it needs to be done right. Until a few years ago, our filing deadline was in May, not in April. And everything was fine, it worked. So again, I think the 19th is an artificial deadline. That's not to say there's no less urgency to get this done. But these are 10-year maps. And it's important to get it right now before we start holding elections.
They could make significant improvements in those maps in a very short period of time. And I know it because we did it and they were headed on the right path. And they just, to Mark's point and Sergio's point, they just got tired and decided to wrap it up and wait for the lawsuits, unfortunately, that they think were coming. And I think it's just, I hope that they'll open them back up and keep working on it because it's 10 more years and we would help.
I do think there.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say quickly that there is a provision also in the Constitution that says that significant changes would trigger a 45-day period. So, and that the attorneys have said that minimal changes to the maps would be fine, but if they make a big change, the maps need to be held for 45 days to provide public comment during those days. But Mark might say something about this. He might disagree.
Yeah, no, Sergio, I disagree. We're now in a phase where if the court orders the commission to do something, I don't believe the 45-day comment period applies.
Right. No, I meant before. Before they approved the maps. If that last week they were to, but I think you're right there.
Now I got to tell you, Sergio, I think that their interpretation of the 45-day was absurd. Why do you have a public comment period if you can't use the public comments to fix the maps? That's absurd.
Can I just add it to it too? It's not just comments. They ask people to post maps. We analyzed 300 maps people on the street made and posted. None of them was even looked at. By the way, I want to answer one question from the chat. Somebody said,
why didn't they be very quick though, because we got to start.
Why didn't they take into account of computer drone maps, including PTV, promote the vote? Promote the vote and AFL-CIO maps were carefully designed, professionally made maps. They were not computer generated.
Okay. For those of you who have an ongoing interest, in fact, that you've hung with us so far, almost everybody tells me that you do. The Ford School is presenting a program, Michigan Redistricting, a model for the nation, evaluating the state's new maps and processes. That's Wednesday, the 19th from 7 to 8:30 in the evening. I don't know if we were able to get a link in a chat or not, but the Ford School is, you can find them by going to the University of Michigan website. They're having a program. Sergio, aren't you on another panel as well? I think someone.
Yes, thank you. I just posted the registration link. So Bridge Michigan is inviting you all to join us on our lunch break. That's on January 26th from noon to 1 p.m. Bring your lunch, join us via Zoom. We'll be talking to Nancy Wang, the Executive Director of Voters Not Politicians, Tony Dunn, the Executive Director of Fair Maps Michigan, and Adrian Emmond, CEO of Grassroots Midwest, a Democratic strategist. We'll be talking about the maps. So more redistricting for y'all if you're interested.
Yes, well, it is important. 10 years we're going to be living with this. Our next show will be on the 30th. And keeping with our practice of you never know what's coming next, our next show is going to be about autism. And we're going to have Dr. Rick Solomon, who's an absolute expert in his field, has done a lot of original research, and he's a clinician here. He's going to be joined by Rebecca Newman. And yes, I am related to her. She is autistic, currently an undergraduate at Mills College. Following that, and we don't have the date nailed down yet, we're back into the political arena with Integrity First America. This is the organization that sued some of the rioters, however you wish to characterize them, at Charlottesville, Virginia, and won $25 million in damages, and has dampened many of those radicals' enthusiasm for this type of action. So, with all of that, I want to thank you for attending. I especially want to thank our panel. This was terrific, and hope to see you in future conversations. Stay safe.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.